What happens when you mix sugar, spice, and everything nice with a bunch of chemical X? The Powerpuff Girls showed the world what little girls are really made of when these unconventional superheroines proved that they weren't afraid to break a nail while they broke a few necks. Bubbles, Blossom, and Buttercup burst onto the screen for their 1998 television debut as the game-changing female superhero trio in a show that completely defied gender stereotypes across the board. I mean, you guys remember the villain, him, right? Yeah, case in point. The show was as weird as it was revolutionary, and people just couldn't get enough of the city of Townsville and its big-headed, bug-eyed supergirls. But unlike other hallmarks from the 90s, the Powerpuff Girls have remained relevant to this day. Some might even say more now than ever. Their superpowered pro-feminist image kept fans hungry when their 6-season run ended back in 2005. And after 12 long years, the Powerpuff Girls have finally returned to save the day in the revival series we've all been waiting for. Which brings me to our topic of interest. Hi, my name is Adam from channel Frederator, and today we'll be looking at some of the differences between the classic Powerpuff Girls series and the all-new 2016 reboot in the Powerpuff Girls Then vs. Now. So check the hotline, heroes, cause it's time to kick some ass! The creative team. Okay, so let's start with the obvious. The biggest change here is the entirely new creative team. So considering that there's all new people running the show, there's bound to be some pretty major differences. But for those of you who don't know the original that well, here's a quick history lesson. The Powerpuff Girls came from the mind of Craig McCracken, a veteran cartoonist who went to do other awesome shows like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Disney's Wander Over Yonder. Craig created the Powerpuffs in 1992 under the working title The Whoop-Ass Girls, in a short film that paid homage to 60s style superhero shows like Batman and corny Japanese tokusatsu shows like Ultraman. Basically shows that featured heroes facing off against giant monsters. The short was eventually submitted to Hanna-Barbera's What a Cartoon program, where they changed the name from Whoop-Ass to Powerpuff. 2 years later, Craig submitted the new revised short to Cartoon Network's world premiere Tooned. And the rest is history. Based on the success of the short, the official series was greenlit and debuted just a few years later as one of the highest rated premieres in history of Cartoon Network. Unfortunately, when the network announced plans for a series revival, Craig had already left Cartoon Network due to their switch in focus towards live action shows, and he was now unable to get involved because of his current contract with Disney. So, Nick Jennings took the reins and gave the show a total makeover. Jennings is one of the head writers behind some of the hugely popular cartoons of this generation, like SpongeBob SquarePants and Adventure Time. And you may notice some of those influences shining through in the new Powerpuff reboot, not just in content or humor, but in the art style too. Episode focus. I'm sure the original Powerpuff fanatics have already noticed the completely different direction that the writers are taking for this new revival series. The biggest shift in focus is that the episodes are no longer storyboard driven, but are character driven instead. As a result, they feel more low concept, like everyday slice of life type of stuff rather than your classic crime fighter capers. In fact, the violence has been reduced significantly. It seems like there's rarely ever a need to save the day anymore, and so crime fighting has taken a backseat to conquering more internal conflicts and learning family-friendly lessons. There's also far less references to iconic pop culture from the 60s and 70s, but rather includes more trendy references to internet memes, dancing, and wait, is that a Hangover parody episode? We never thought we'd see the Powerpuff Girls get totally trashed. This is just one of the many firsts the new series brings to the table in its attempt to connect to the new generation of fans. It's a drastically different style of comedy, but it still works. Unfortunately, the new series relies heavily on the slapstick and absurdist humor, while the awesome action sequences are something to be left desired. Honestly, comparing the two can be like comparing day and night, but we do think it's a refreshing change to make the girls seem more down to earth in the new series. According to the creative team, the idea was to downplay the superhero side of life that was heavily showcased in the original, and instead show an all-new side to the Powerpuff Girls. The side that makes them seem more relatable to girls today, you know, like they did when they made that Captain America sequel. Oh. Art style. As you'd expect with a reboot, the art and animation style have been completely revamped. Still, the background and the city of Townsville itself are designed pretty closely to the original. Powerpuff Girls was always praised for its pop art style. It was highly stylized but with minimal visuals. We like to describe it as abstract. but it's often referred to by critics as more of a 50s futuristic style, which is a pop art style that emerged from Britain during the mid-50s. A good example of this would be the old Disney Tomorrowland posters, which inspired the backgrounds for the hit Disney TV series Kim Possible. As mentioned, the 2016 Powerpuff Girls definitely hold some resemblance to the original, but the lines are definitely thinner, the shapes are far more rounded, and the color palette went from dark, cool colors to bright pastels. The visuals definitely lost their slightly rugged look and were replaced with something more cute and inviting. Voice actors. It surprised everyone when Cartoon Network announced the recasting of Powerpuff Girls, and a high standard was immediately set. The new girls had some pretty big shoes to fill, so you can imagine how intimidating it must have been for a few up-and-coming actresses. Thankfully, the new cast did their characters justice. Young actresses Amanda Layton, Kristen Lee, and Natalie Palamides are now the proud voices of Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup, in that order. It was originally Kathy Cavadini as Blossom, Tara Strong as Bubbles, and Elizabeth Daly as Buttercup. Jennings explained this decision for a new main voiceover cast, stating, "We considered bringing back the original cast and thought it over like every other element of the show, but it seemed like a really great way to infuse some new energy into the series. Automatically, it sort of resets the show and says, this is something different. The voices we have now will allow the new generation to take ownership of these characters." Luckily, some of the other actors returned for their roles in Townsville. Tom Kenny is still the mayor and narrator, Tom Kane reprised for his role as the professor, and Roger Jackson is still Mojo Jojo. In fact, most of the supporting roles and several background roles are the same actors. The Powerpuff Girls are really the most noticeable change. The Powerpuff Girls. Despite their similar design, the new Powerpuff Girls are drastically different in personality, which makes sense because they're no longer at Pokey Oats Kindergarten, a school only consisting of the kindergarten grade. Now they attend Midway Elementary School, which includes more grades, yet still has Miss Keene as a teacher. Though they are still 5 years old, they have a blaring new tween attitude. It's a pretty big personality change too. The girls use slang, they obsess over boys, and they twerk? It's not just the personalities that have changed. The character dynamic has also shifted. There's no longer a leader mentally within the group. It feels more equal. Although, sometimes it seems like Blossom takes a back seat to the other girls because of this shift. A majority of time, Buttercup and Bubbles see more of the limelight as far as the plot is concerned. And the characters explore new aspects of life that we never thought possible. They do still kick ass when the time calls for it. One of the more intriguing additions to the show includes a brand new set of powers that the girls develop. In the season 1 episode, Power Up Puff, the girls discovered that they have these weird shape-shifting / light-bending powers. It reminds me of the Green Lantern, but it definitely makes for an interesting development on the show. The female empowerment is still going strong in these new seasons, but some people feel it's a little more on the nose in its approach. Instead of it being in the overall theme, it's usually blatantly present in the dialogue or in the situation. Like, the moral of the story is outright stated rather than interpreted by the viewer, as in the original series. City of Townsville. For the most part, the city of Townsville remains the same, but there are some notable differences with the residents. Mainly, the background characters lost their old look and were redesigned using a more trendy style seen in most cartoons today. Now, the other kids and citizens are very round in shape, and they resemble characters out of popular shows like Clarence and Steven Universe. Since the superhero theme is now downplayed, so is the quirky narrator. He used to introduce the show, comment on the scenes, and conclude every episode with a funny improvised end cap. The mayor is relatively the same, perhaps slightly more reckless, but again, his role has been majorly downplayed without the city under constant peril. Oh, and did we mention there's no Miss Bellum? She just disappeared one day, leaving a goodbye note and nothing else. Ugh, I always knew that woman was a heartbreaker. Villains of Townsville. So, because the original was a blatant superhero parody, the villains were very old-fashioned in their approach. In fact, the Powerpuff Girls / superhero villain relationship was totally reminiscent of the old 60s Batman. Don't believe me? Rewatch the old Powerpuff Girls intro. It uses similar elements to the 66 Batman intro. The slow pan across the villains, the comical close-up action shots, the punching and kicking sound effects, it's fantastic! So, like you'd see in those old superhero shows, there was a cast of known supervillains, and each one would try to eliminate the Powerpuff Girls so they could destroy the town or take over the world. You know, the usual villain stuff. Each one was extremely iconic too, with a branding that was hard to forget because they each had such a specific style. style. There was Sedusa, him, Fuzzy Lumpkins, the Amiibo Boys, Gangrene Gang, and of course, Mojo Jojo. Most of these guys still exist in the new series, but their actions are much more small scale. Really, they almost seem like just crazy neighbors. For example, the first time Mojo shows up, he ends up playing dress up with the girls. Yet another side effect from this no violence revamp. That's because villains are no longer the focus anymore. As a result, these villains in the new series are much more random, but they're also rarely the conflict of the plot. The new show is more about self-reflection, overcoming trivial disputes, and dealing with situations like that weird twerking rainbow bear thing. The controversy. There was actually a lot of criticism over the classic 1998 episodes, and now there's even more over the reboot. If you grew up with the original, you may not have known this, but a lot of parents at the time felt that Powerpuff Girls were too violent for young kids. It's understandable, seeing that they literally fought their way through every problem. Ironically, most of the new criticism comes from nostalgic fans who think the reboot isn't violent enough. There was also a lot of outrage over the removal of Miss Bellum from the series. According to the creative team, this was a conscious decision to discard any sexualized characters from the show. Jennings stated, "We felt like Miss Bellum wasn't quite indicative of the kind of messaging we wanted to be giving out at this time, so we sort of had her move on. And that was a good choice, I think, on our part." Following this decision, they removed Miss Keen's boobs. It's haunting. Then, of course, for anyone keeping up with Powerpuff Girls news, you might have seen the original creator's reaction to the reboot. As it turns out, he did not support the decision. Yep, he even argued against it. Craig even tweeted about the reboot saying, "I never officially gave it my blessing. I just understood the business reality that I had no power to stop it from being made." Although the biggest complaint had to be the sudden recasting of the Powerpuff Girls themselves. Obviously, the new generation wouldn't know the difference, but the nostalgic fans were pretty discouraged, and so was Craig McCracken himself. The original voice actresses were pretty upset too, and expressed their outrage online, tweeting that they felt hurt they weren't asked to come back. Tara Strong stated that the news was an utter stab to the heart. However, the original Powerpuffs also wished the new cast good luck, bearing no ill will towards the new voice actresses. The generation. Professor Utonium's test tube babies graced us with a new sense of girlhood, one with less Barbies and boys, and more butt kicking. The Powerpuffs dedicated their lives to fighting crime, but they offered the world so much more, like a witty sense of humor and enough bloody battles to make any boy blush. Seriously, Buttercup punched out a guy's teeth in the opening intro. The show was edgy to say the least. Needless to say, the girls are now a touchstone for any 90s childhood. The show brought about a new age of heroism in popular media, and hopefully the reboot will have the same effect. And while the old fans have some reservations about the show, these new Powerpuff Girls were designed to appeal to an entirely new generation of kids. One that's significantly different from the original 1998 demographic, and even slightly older too. Sure, there's tons of changes that reflect the times, but we're glad they're taking another chance at the Powerpuffs. The millennials need to know what they're missing: the magic of the golden age of cartoons. This revamp is a perfect attempt to inspire an entirely new generation, so that once again the day can be saved thanks to the Powerpuff Girls. I'm Adam, and thanks for watching the Powerpuff Girls Then vs. Now. Did we miss any changes? Are you a fan of the original, the reboot, or both? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to click the bell to become part of the notification squad. We have new videos dropping every week, so make sure to subscribe to channel Frederator, your Cartoon Central on the internet.